There is a ledger hidden deep within the vaults of a forgotten Georgian plantation, where the ink tells a lie. It records a marriage solemnized in the year of our Lord 1841, but the names written there, the union it purports to document, is a carefully constructed facade, a shield of propriety erected to hide a truth so shocking, so fundamentally disruptive to the antebellum social order that it had to be buried alive. For this was not a marriage of convenience or a merger of powerful families. This was the story of a merchant's daughter, a child of privilege and gilded cages, who looked upon her father's human property, a man bound in chains, and saw not a slave, but a husband. Welcome, shadow walkers and keepers of forbidden histories, to Eclipsed Chronicles. I am your guide through the silences of the past. Tonight, we descend into the humid, oppressive heat of the American South, where the air was thick with the scent of magnolia and the unspoken terror of the peculiar institution. Our stage is a sprawling estate just outside Savannah, a monument to cotton wealth and human suffering. Here, amidst the rustling skirts of high society and the silent, resentful glances of the enslaved, a drama began to unfold, a drama of stolen glances, whispered conversations in the dead of night, and a love that the world was engineered to destroy. Her name was Eleanor. He was called Isaiah. And their story begins not with a grand declaration, but with a simple, dangerous act, a book falling from a shelf. Eleanor, the merchant's only daughter, was a creature of immense loneliness. Her world was a gilded prison of parlor rooms and chaperoned walks, her future a preordained path to a marriage that would further her father's commercial empire. She found her only solace in her father's library, a sanctuary of leather-bound volumes and worlds far beyond the Georgia marshes. It was there, one rain-lashed afternoon, that she reached for a heavy copy of Milton's Paradise Lost, her fingers slipping on the polished spine. The book tumbled, but before it could crash onto the mahogany floor, a hand, dark and calloused, shot out and caught it. The hand belonged to Isaiah. He was her father's most trusted slave, a man of quiet intelligence and a simmering, contained dignity that set him apart. He was permitted in the library for cleaning, a task he performed with a reverence Eleanor recognized in herself. Their eyes met over the rescued book. No words were exchanged, but in that silent, electric moment, something passed between them, an acknowledgement, a spark of mutual understanding in a world that insisted they were not even the same species. That single, silent moment was the first crack in the foundation of their world. It was a heresy, it was an impossibility, and it was the beginning of everything. The silence between them became a language of its own. In the weeks that followed, the library transformed from a solitary refuge into a clandestine meeting ground. Eleanor began to arrange her visits when she knew Isaiah would be there, dusting the high shelves or polishing the brass fittings. A book left open on a specific table, a volume of poetry subtly misplaced for him to find these were their first, fragile letters. He, in turn, began to leave small, silent replies. A wildflower, pressed between the pages of her favorite Shelley. A feather, its iridescent blue a stark contrast to the dark wood of her reading desk. It was a courtship conducted in the negative space of their lives, a tapestry woven with threads of stolen glances and the breathless space between heartbeats. Eleanor, who had been taught that men of Isaiah's station were little more than brutes, found in him a profound intellect. She once, daringly, left a newspaper detailing the abolitionist debates in the North. The next day, she found it neatly folded, a single, carefully drawn question mark penciled in the margin next to a particularly hypocritical quote from a Southern senator. He was not just property, he was a mind, a soul, questioning the very system that held him captive. For Isaiah, Eleanor was not merely the master's daughter, a symbol of his oppression. She was a crack of light in the utter darkness of his existence. Her curiosity was genuine, her compassion a dangerous and beautiful flaw in the armor of her privilege. She saw the man, not the slave. And in a world dedicated to stripping him of his manhood, that recognition was a potent, terrifying form of rebellion. He knew the consequences. They both did. Discovery would not mean scandal. It would mean ruin, torture, perhaps death for him, and utter social annihilation for her. Yet the pull was gravitational, irresistible. Their shared world of books and silent understanding became more real than the gilded cage of the plantation or the relentless brutality of the fields. They were building a paradise, knowing full well it was lost before it even began. Paradise, however, is always contingent. The fragile world Eleanor and Isaiah had constructed in the quiet of the library was shattered by a single, misplaced token. Eleanor, in a moment of reckless affection, had slipped a small, silver locket, a childhood trinket, into the fold of a book she knew he would handle. It was an irrefutable, physical proof of her regard, a tangible piece of her world she was desperate to share with him. But the locket did not remain hidden. It was found by another house slave, a woman named Cora, whose eyes missed nothing and whose loyalty was to her own survival. The news traveled through the servant quarters like a fever, a sibilant whisper of shock and fear. It reached the ears of the plantation's overseer, a man named Briggs, whose cruelty was as dependable as the sunrise. Briggs did not go to the merchant directly. Such a delicate, explosive matter required a different approach. He went to Eleanor's father, not with an accusation, but with a poisoned observation. "Sir," he said, his voice oily with false concern, "there's talk about Miss Eleanor and the house slave, Isaiah. It's probably just foolish gossip, of course, but the girl spends an awful lot of time in that library alone." The merchant, a man named Alistair, was a pillar of commerce and southern propriety. His initial reaction was not anger, but a cold, disbelieving horror. He dismissed Briggs with a wave, but the seed was planted. That evening, he watched his daughter at the dinner table. He saw the distant look in her eyes, a look not of a dreaming young woman, but of a woman with a secret. He saw the way her fingers trembled slightly around her fork, and he knew the truth, ugly and impossible, settled in his gut like a stone. His daughter, his blood, had transgressed the most fundamental law of their society. She had not merely been kind, she had formed an attachment, and in the world of Alistair, such an attachment was a sickness that threatened to consume his legacy, his honor, and his very place in the world. Alistair's rage was a silent, frigid thing, more terrifying than any outburst. He did not confront Eleanor immediately. Instead, he began to dismantle their world with the cold precision of a surgeon. The first cut was the deepest. Isaiah was gone from the main house. No explanation was given. One morning, he simply wasn't there. The library felt cavernous and empty, the polished shelves seeming to mock Eleanor's despair. She inquired, her voice a fragile thread of panic, only to be met with her father's stony gaze. "The slave has been reassigned," was all he said, the words final as a tombstone sealing shut. His presence in the house was inappropriate. Reassignment meant the fields. It meant back-breaking labor from dawn until dusk under the relentless sun and the merciless lash of Overseer Briggs. It was a death sentence, slower than hanging, but just as certain. For Eleanor, the silence that followed was a scream trapped in her throat. Her days became a torturous routine of pretending normalcy, while her mind conjured images of Isaiah suffering, broken, because of her foolish, loving gift. The gilded cage of her life had now become a prison of pure agony. She tried to catch a glimpse of him, to send a message, but the house was watched, her movements subtly restricted. Her father's control was absolute, a velvet-gloved fist slowly tightening around her. Meanwhile, in the brutal world of the cotton fields, Isaiah endured a different kind of hell. Briggs, sensing the master's silent fury, took special pleasure in breaking him. The work was harder, the tasks more demeaning, the whip always a breath away. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the torment of separation. He saw Eleanor only from a distance, a pale, sorrowful ghost on a veranda, and the sight was a fresh lash across his soul. He had known the risk, but the reality of their punishment was a suffocating weight. The paradise they had lost now felt like a cruel dream, and the waking world was a nightmare from which there was no escape. The merchant's strategy was simple: to grind their spirits into dust, to make the memory of their affection a source of shame and pain. But the human spirit, once awakened, is a stubborn flame. It can be battered by the wind, smothered by darkness, yet still it finds a way to flicker. Desperation, the mother of all audacity, began to breed a new, more dangerous plan in Eleanor's heart. She could not accept this silent erasure. The thought of Isaiah broken in the fields, of their connection being severed by her father's cold will, became an unbearable torment. She had to see him. She had to know. Her only ally, she realized with a surge of hopeless hope, was Cora, the very woman whose discovery had sparked this disaster. It was a desperate gamble. Approaching Cora was to walk into the lion's den. She found her in the laundry house, the air thick with steam and the sharp scent of lye. Cora's eyes widened in fear as Eleanor stepped inside, a forbidden trespass. "I know you saw," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible over the hiss of the irons. "And I do not blame you, but you must help me now." She offered the only thing she had of true value, a promise. "Help me, and I will see you and your children freed. I will sign the papers myself. You have my word." Cora stared, her face a mask of conflict. The promise was a shimmering mirage in the desert of her life, too beautiful to be true, too potent to ignore. To trust the master's daughter was madness, but to refuse was to forever wonder if she had let freedom slip through her fingers. The silence stretched, taut as a hangman's rope. Finally, Cora gave a single sharp nod. It was not a pact of friendship, but a transaction forged in the fires of their shared, desperate circumstances. A flicker of rebellion had been passed, a secret alliance formed in the heart of the enemy's fortress. The plan was as fragile as a spider's web, and just as perilous. Through Cora, a single terse message was passed. The old mill, midnight, 2 nights hence. The old gristmill on the far edge of the property, its wheel long stilled, its interior thick with the ghosts of cobwebs and abandoned dreams. It was a place of silence and shadows, far from the prying eyes of the main house and the slave quarters. The night itself seemed to conspire against them. A heavy, low-hanging fog rolled in from the marshes, swallowing the moon and muffling all sound, turning the familiar landscape into a phantom world. Eleanor, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, slipped from the house, a dark cloak pulled tight around her. Every crunch of a twig under her slipper was a thunderclap in the eerie quiet. She moved like a wraith through the oppressive grey, guided by memory and a desperate, clawing need. He was already there, a darker shadow within the pitch-black interior of the mill. The smell of damp wood and decay filled the air. For a long moment, they simply stood, separated by a few feet of darkness, the chasm of their worlds made physical. Then, a broken sob escaped Eleanor's lips, and the distance vanished. They crashed together in the dark, not in a lover's embrace, but in a frantic, terrified clutch of 2 souls shipwrecked. His arms around her felt like both sanctuary and a confirmation of their doom. She could feel the new calluses on his hands, the sharpness of his ribs beneath his rough shirt. He smelled of sweat and soil, the very essence of the punishment he was enduring. "He will kill you," Eleanor whispered, her voice raw with terror. "Or he will sell you. I will not live with that." It was, in that moment, in the absolute darkness of the mill, that the impossible idea was born. Not to run, that was a fantasy that would get them both killed, but to claim a piece of each other, to forge a bond that their world could not simply erase. "There is a man," Isaiah murmured, his voice low and steady despite the tremor in his hands. "A traveling preacher. They say he does not see color, only souls. They say he will perform ceremonies, a marriage." The word hung unspoken in the air between them, a blasphemy so profound it stole the very air from the room. To wed her father's slave. It was not just rebellion, it was a declaration of war against the entire foundation of their reality. The name of the preacher was Eli, a spectral figure who existed on the frayed edges of society. He was a free man of color, a circuit rider who ministered to a scattered flock of freedmen, outcasts, and those who dwelled in the shadowlands between law and faith. Finding him was a task that fell to Cora, whose network of whispers extended far beyond the plantation's borders. It was a week of breathless, agonizing tension before she brought back word. Eli was camped in a pine barren 2 days' ride away, and he was known to perform unions others would not. The price was not coin, but absolute secrecy and a willingness to stand before God in truth. The logistics of their flight were a nightmare woven from desperation. Alistair's watchful eye had grown more hawk-like, and Briggs's suspicion was a palpable force. Yet, the very audacity of their plan provided a strange, perilous clarity. Using a tincture of laudanum stolen from her mother's cabinet, Eleanor drugged the evening tea of the most vigilant house servants, creating a window of profound stillness. Isaiah, under the cover of the ever-present marsh fog, slipped away from the quarters, moving not as a man, but as a phantom, using paths known only to the hunted. Their meeting point was a desolate crossroads, marked by a lightning-blasted oak, a place locals avoided for its ill omen. It was there, under a sliver of a cold, uncaring moon, that they met Preacher Eli. He was an old man, his face a roadmap of hardship, but his eyes held a deep, unsettling calm. He asked them no questions about masters or plantations. He looked only at their faces, at their intertwined hands, and he saw only 2 souls standing before him. The ceremony was not one of joy, but of solemn, terrifying defiance. There were no rings, no family to bear witness, only Cora, her face etched with fear, and the ancient pines standing as silent sentinels. Eli's voice, low and resonant, spoke the old words into the vast, indifferent night. "What God hath joined together, let no man put asunder." In that moment, in the eyes of God and the darkness, Eleanor and Isaiah were no longer master and slave, they were husband and wife. It was the most sacred and the most dangerous secret ever kept. The return was the most dangerous part, sliding back into their respective roles, their separate hells, now forever altered by the covenant they had sworn. For Isaiah, the pre-dawn return to the slave quarters was a walk to the gallows. Every shadow held the shape of Briggs, every sound the crack of a whip. For Eleanor, the creeping of the drug's effects from the household and the resumption of normalcy felt like a grotesque pantomime. She sat at the breakfast table, pushing food around her plate, a married woman whose husband was a ghost in the fields, a man her father could sell or kill on a whim. The secret was a live coal in her chest, burning with a terrifying, sacred heat. For a few weeks, a fragile, impossible peace held. They were bound by their secret, their stolen union, a hidden fortress within them. But a secret of this magnitude has a weight, a gravitational pull that warps the space around it. It was Cora, the linchpin of their entire scheme, who began to crack under the strain. Her fear was a growing, suffocating thing. Every glance from Briggs felt accusatory. Every casual question from Alistair felt like an interrogation. The promise of freedom began to feel like a taunt, a prize she would only receive if she could survive the ever-tightening noose of suspicion. She started seeing consequences in every corner, the promised freedom eclipsed by the very real and immediate threat of a beating or being sold down the river herself as punishment for her complicity. The transaction now felt like a pact with the devil, and she was desperate to renegotiate her soul's price. The end did not come with a shout, but with a whisper. Cora, her nerves frayed to breaking, sought an audience with Alistair. She did not confess outright. She bartered fragments of the truth, hoping to secure her own safety without fully dooming the others. She spoke of Eleanor's unhealthy fixation, of late-night wanderings, of a dangerous influence clouding the young mistress's judgment. She gave no names, no specific location, but she painted a picture of a corruption so deep it threatened the very foundation of the household. It was a calculated betrayal, designed to save her own skin while giving the merchant just enough information to act. Alistair listened, his face a granite mask. Cora's insinuations confirmed his deepest fears. This was not a fleeting infatuation, it was a sickness that had taken root. He thanked her coldly and dismissed her. The time for observation was over. The time for eradication had begun. He summoned Briggs. The orders were simple, brutal, and final. The slave, Isaiah, he has become a corrosive influence. Take him, tonight. See that he is dealt with, permanently. There is a buyer in New Orleans who pays well for strong backs and asks no questions. Make the arrangements. I want no trace of him left by sunrise. The words, dealt with, and no trace, hung in the air, their meaning chillingly unambiguous. This was not a sale. It was an erasure. That night, the silence of the slave quarters was torn apart by the sound of boots, harsh voices, and the sickening thud of a struggle quickly subdued. Eleanor, jolted from a fitful sleep, knew with a primal, chilling certainty what the commotion meant. She ran to her window, her heart hammering against her ribs, just in time to see a dark, writhing shape being dragged into the woods, a shape she knew as well as her own. A single, muffled cry was cut short, swallowed by the greedy darkness. It was the sound of her world ending. What follows the cataclysm? Not an ending, but a long, slow sinking into silence. Eleanor did not scream. She did not rage. She stood at the window until the sun rose, painting the world in cruel, cheerful colors. When she turned from the glass, something within her had calcified. The merchant's daughter was gone, and in her place was a widow in a world that would never acknowledge her grief. Alistair, believing the problem excised, expected his daughter to return to her senses, to become the pliable instrument of his legacy once more. He could not comprehend the nature of the bond he had severed. He had destroyed the man, but he had immortalized the love. Eleanor lived the rest of her days in a state of quiet, unyielding defiance. She never married. She never spoke of Isaiah again. But in the family ledger, that official record of births, deaths, and alliances, she performed one final subversive act. On the line documenting her own existence in the space for marital status, she did not write spinster. In a hand as steady and cold as stone, she wrote the single word, Wednesday. No date, no spouse's name, just the fact of the union, a ghost of a truth haunting the page for any future soul sharp enough to see it. The ledger survives. The plantation is long gone, reclaimed by the voracious Georgia woods. But the secret remains, etched in fading ink and the silent, stubborn memory of the land itself. It is a testament to a love that dared to name itself in a world designed to deny its very existence. A love that was purchased not with a ring, but with a price of unimaginable courage and ultimate loss. This is the kind of history that does not shout, but whispers from the shadows. If you are drawn to these eclipsed tales, to the truths buried beneath the official record, then you belong here with us. Subscribe to Eclipsed Chronicles. We are just beginning to unearth the secrets.